Imagining an elderly woman who once nursed her own mother can be challenging, as the sight of her aged features limits one's ability to envision the past. This is akin to the impression that America leaves when one contemplates its global supremacy and the remarkable journey from a British colony to a nation of self-determination and identity, the United States of America. Known as the land of the brave and the home of the free, I invite you to explore the historical narrative surrounding the American Revolutionary War of 1776. The British monarchy insisted that the colonies would not be liberated, while the insurgents held steadfast in their belief that all men are created equal, prepared to fight for victory or perish. Although initial motivations for rebellion may have been driven by self-interest, 1776 marked a pivotal transformation, culminating in America's aspirational Declaration of Independence. However, this year also thrust Americans into a desperate conflict as Britain unleashed its full military might upon its colonies. Concurrently, while American rebels engaged British troops at the Battle of Bunker Hill, the Continental Congress convened at Philadelphia's Independence Hall, previously known as Pennsylvania State House. John Adams was convinced he could persuade a hesitant Congress to support the army forming around Boston, and he believed he had the right person for this task. He proposed that Congress endorse the army at Cambridge and appoint a general, expressing no doubt that he had one individual in mind for this crucial role, a gentleman from Virginia named George Washington. Washington appeared at the convention donning his scarlet and blue Virginia militia uniform, signaling his readiness for military command. With this strategic move, John Adams united the plantation-based southern colonies with their industry-focused northern counterparts while simultaneously providing the nascent Continental Army with a strong and charismatic leader. He embodied the revolution itself. He represented the army. He is the only American in history who could have ascended to the throne if he had wished. Toward the conclusion of the revolution, there was a proposal to crown him as the king of the new nation. Although I genuinely appreciate the significant honor of this appointment, I also feel considerable anxiety due to my awareness that my skills and military experience may not match the vast and crucial responsibilities entrusted to me. Nonetheless, as Congress wishes, I will undertake this monumental duty and apply every capability I have in their service and for the advancement of our noble cause. This was George Washington addressing the Continental Congress. Washington was a man of notable presence. His mere entrance into a room commanded attention. Standing at around 6 feet 3 inches, he was exceptionally tall for his time, making him appear almost giant-like. He ranked among the wealthiest individuals in America, owning vast tracts of land in Virginia, much of which he acquired through his marriage to Martha Custis, the wealthiest widow in Virginia, at their wedding. Additionally, he inherited a considerable estate from his brother Lawrence at Mount Vernon and possessed extensive land in the West, gained as rewards for his service during the French and Indian War. This illustrates how unique the American Revolution was. It was not an effort to dismantle the existing class hierarchy. Rather, it was a conflict aimed at safeguarding rights, privileges, and property that Americans believed they were entitled to as free-born Englishmen. At Mount Vernon, Washington managed an estate that employed over 300 workers and enslaved individuals. He had a formidable character. He wasn't merely the elderly figure depicted on currency today. He stood tall and straight like an Indian, inspiring admiration among men. He enjoyed drinking and gambling and was known for his card-playing skills. When angered, he could unleash a torrent of curses. While you have prepared me to hold him in high regard, I feel that only half of his true nature has been revealed to me. His dignity blended seamlessly with ease and confidence. Both gentlemanly charm and military demeanor harmoniously coexisted within him. Modesty was evident in every feature of his face, as noted by Abigail Adams upon meeting George Washington. People remarked on his extraordinary grace and skill as a horseman. He was indeed powerful, inheriting his father's strength. He tended to be reserved, speaking little, due to two main reasons. It was simply his nature to be humble, and he suffered from poor dental health that embarrassed him throughout his life. You often see portraits of him with his lips tightly pressed together. My dearest, I am now writing to you about a matter that causes me profound distress. Congress has decided that the entire Army assembled for the defense of the American cause will be placed under my command, and it is imperative that I travel immediately to Boston to assume this role. This was George Washington communicating to his wife, Martha. 2 weeks following the Battle of Bunker Hill, Washington rode to Cambridge and officially took command of the Continental Army. He managed to keep the British forces confined within Boston and its harbor for several months while observing his new army, primarily made up of independent and undisciplined state militiamen, shrink due to desertions and the expiration of enlistments. Such a lack of public spirit and virtue, such a mercenary attitude permeates the whole that I would not be surprised by any disaster that may occur. Had I known what I have experienced and what I am likely to face? No earthly consideration should have compelled me to accept this command, Washington expressed on October the 29th, 1775. Nevertheless, enough seasoned militia re-enlisted and a sufficient number of new recruits emerged in the following months to keep this fragile army intact. Washington positioned his forces on the heights of Dorchester Peninsula, allowing him to observe the British, though he could not pose a direct threat due to the absence of heavy artillery. It is impossible to discuss the initial 3 years of the war, 1775, 1776, and 1777, without acknowledging two pivotal figures who sustained it, George Washington and Benedict Arnold. Both were exceptional warriors and outstanding motivators for their troops. They exhibited remarkable bravery on the battlefield and accomplished significant feats. Benedict Arnold remains one of the great enigmas in American history. The impact of his betrayal was particularly profound because he had once been such a celebrated hero. In May 1775, Arnold, a prosperous merchant from Connecticut whose name has become synonymous with treachery, devised a plan to provide the Patriots with the cannons and munitions they desperately required. Far up the Hudson River, at the southern end of Lake Champlain, stood a rundown and understaffed British fort from the French and Indian War, known as Ticonderoga. Arnold rallied 400 men to capture the fort and its numerous heavy cannons. During this mission, he learned that Ethan Allen was also heading there independently, so he proceeded ahead with just one companion to join forces with Allen. Ethan Allen was a formidable frontier leader who commanded Vermont's Green Mountain Boys. Citizens of Hartford, Connecticut, had commissioned him and his group as an ideal guerrilla force to seize the fort. However, Arnold and Allen did not get along at all. Their relationship was fraught with conflict. They clashed personally and disagreed on command, leading to confusion. Surprisingly, capturing Ticonderoga turned out to be quite easy. The British defenders were unaware of the skirmishes at Lexington and Concord, and apart from one guard, they were all asleep. By the time the alarm was raised, the Americans had already taken control of the fort. They held the British at bayonet point, resulting in a surrender without any casualties. With Ticonderoga now under American control, transporting the cannons to Boston would require the ingenuity and determination of Henry Knox, a 280-pound Boston bookseller. Despite having learned about weaponry solely through books, Washington was impressed enough by Knox's intellect to appoint him as commander of artillery. I have constructed 42 exceptionally sturdy sleds and arranged for 80 yokes of oxen to pull them. I anticipate presenting Your Excellency with a magnificent convoy of artillery in 16 or 17 days, Knox wrote to Washington. In a remarkable achievement, Knox successfully transported over 50 cannons through the snowy mountains of New England to Boston. With these cannons now at his disposal, Washington was prepared to take action. Under the cover of darkness, he positioned a significant number of them on Dorchester Peninsula. The next morning, the British awoke to find these guns aimed directly at them. "The rebels have accomplished in one night what my entire army could not achieve in months," remarked General William Howe upon witnessing Dorchester Heights. By mid-March 1776, less than 2 weeks after the cannons from Ticonderoga were placed atop Dorchester Heights, the British set sail for Halifax, Nova Scotia, taking with them 1,000 loyalists from Boston. The Americans celebrated what they believed to be a significant victory, though in reality it was an entirely deceptive triumph. They did not inflict casualties on a single British soldier. While they regained control of Boston, the entire British Army had managed to escape and would return to fight another day, re-emerging as a formidable force. The notion that the 13 colonies achieved independence gives a false sense of inevitability, as if the modern United States was always a cohesive entity. In truth, what transpired was the fragmentation of British America. The rebels anticipated that their future nation would encompass not only the 13 colonies, but also Canada, Newfoundland, Labrador, and the West Indies. With the backing of the 13 colonies, they resolved in late 1775 to pursue a 14th, Canada, the vast frozen expanse to the north. In September 1775, General George Washington assigned one of Ticonderoga's heroes, Benedict Arnold, to lead 1,100 troops through Maine to capture the fortress city of Quebec. "You are entrusted with a command of utmost significance for America's liberties. The success of this endeavor and your honor depend on your conduct and courage, as well as that of the officers and soldiers involved in this expedition. The safety and welfare of the entire continent may hinge on it," Washington stated. Arnold was part of a two-pronged assault. General Philip Schuyler and General Richard Montgomery would lead a separate force of 1,200 men from Fort Ticonderoga to Montreal before advancing down the St. Lawrence River to rendezvous with Arnold in Quebec. While Montgomery's route would prove challenging and perilous, Arnold's trek through the wilderness of Maine would be legendary. They set sail from a port near Boston to the mouth of Maine's Kennebec River, marking the true beginning of their 385-mile journey through untamed terrain to Quebec. Arnold's march is considered one of the great narratives of the Revolution, a testament to leadership amid tremendous obstacles and a willingness to endure severe hardship and even starvation by those who accompanied him. They navigated up the Kennebec River in heavy 200-pound bateaux, which had to be carried around numerous waterfalls. "You might have thought the men were amphibious creatures, as they spent much time submerged," Arnold remarked. Leading Arnold's expedition was Daniel Morgan, depicted here as an older man, but actually a tough and resourceful 39-year-old frontier veteran who had lost all his teeth on one side due to an Indian bullet wound sustained 17 years prior. Morgan commanded 3 companies of riflemen for Arnold's mission. By late October, winter's grip was tightening in the north, and their supplies had been depleted. "The ravenous hunger many of us experienced made almost anything acceptable," noted Dr. Isaac Center. A poor dog in their company became a victim for sustenance. It was consumed without leaving any trace behind, along with other provisions like shaving soap and leather from their shoes. More than half of them did not survive. They perished from disease or starvation, or chose to abandon the mission and return home. The remaining men pressed onward past the headwaters of the Kennebec toward Canada's Chaudière River, struggling through mud as they approached steep inclines while contemplating the suffering that awaited them before reaching their destination. They grasped at every twig and shrub for support as they fought against slipping back down the treacherous terrain. "They fall down to rise no more," lamented Private George Morrison. Without Arnold's personal leadership and resilience, the group might not have survived. As they faced the brink of freezing to death from exposure, Arnold, along with a select few, raced ahead to the French settlements on the Canadian side, secured food, and returned to nourish the weary men. I have been misled by every account of our route, which is longer and fraught with countless difficulties I never anticipated. Yet if we succeed, I shall consider it a trivial matter," Arnold remarked. Rejuvenated by the provisions, Arnold and his men advanced toward the formidable cliffs of Point Levis, situated across the St. Lawrence River from Quebec City. Indeed, there was a river, the St. Lawrence, and two cities, Montreal and Quebec. The second prong of the American assault on Canada had successfully captured the smaller and less significant city of Montreal. Ironically, this achievement may have thwarted Arnold's efforts to seize Quebec, which was crucial for controlling Canada. Just before he was set to launch his attack with makeshift scarecrows, still a stronger force than the British troops fleeing from Montreal entered the citadel, bolstering the garrison's strength beyond what Arnold could overcome. At that moment, the fate of modern Canada was determined. Had the Americans taken Quebec, it is highly unlikely they would have ever been dislodged. The battle for Quebec had concluded. From a hospital bed on the outskirts of the fortified city, a determined Benedict Arnold lay with loaded pistols and a sword by his side. "I have no intention of leaving this proud town until I first enter it in triumph. I am committed to my duty and know no fear," Arnold declared. The Americans came remarkably close to making Canada the 14th colony, and if that had been achieved, it would have been largely due to Arnold's efforts. Upon returning to Philadelphia from England in May 1775, Benjamin Franklin found the atmosphere charged with the signs of impending war. He dedicated himself to the Patriot cause, despite being an unlikely revolutionary figure. At 70 years old in 1776, he was considerably older than most revolutionaries, and it was uncommon for someone of his age to risk everything for such a cause. Franklin already possessed an international reputation that none of the other revolutionaries had, along with everything to lose and little to gain. Yet he immersed himself in the struggle with fervor, fueled by his anger at the British government for humiliating him in 1774. Simultaneously, the divide between him and his loyalist son, William, continued to widen. Franklin and William spent an entire night discussing the revolution's prospects while consuming many bottles of Madeira, Franklin's favored drink. Despite their discussions, Franklin could not sway his son's loyalty to England. William remained steadfast in his allegiance to the crown, which had granted him respectability as governor of New Jersey. William Franklin emerged as a loyalist leader, while his revolutionary father became part of a select five-man committee tasked with drafting one of history's most significant documents. The Declaration of Independence stands as perhaps the most crucial document of the Revolution, and indeed American history, because it articulates the ideals under which the United States operates. It encapsulates a unifying belief that all men are created equal, now interpreted as all persons, and asserts that everyone possesses certain inalienable rights. These ideals serve as the glue binding together a diverse populace. Many rebel leaders were hesitant to declare independence. In July 1775, Congress even sent a conciliatory proposal directly to King George III. John Adams referred to it as the Olive Branch Petition. However, the king refused to acknowledge it and instead issued a confrontational proclamation. Whereas many of our subjects in various parts of our colonies and plantations in North America, misled by dangerous and ill-designing men, have ultimately proceeded to openly declare rebellion against the power that has protected and supported them, we do hereby strictly charge and command our officers and all other obedient and loyal subjects to make every effort to resist and suppress such rebellion, proclaimed George III on August 23, 1775. The king was convinced, like many of his subjects, that retaining control over the American colonies was essential and remained steadfastly opposed even to peace negotiations at war's end. His belief echoed a domino theory. If America were allowed to break away, everything else would inevitably follow suit. The narrative surrounding the American Revolution and its key figures is rich with complexity and significance. Thomas Paine, an Englishman sponsored by Benjamin Franklin, authored a groundbreaking pamphlet titled Common Sense in early 1776, which became a pivotal call for independence. This 47-page work sold 100,000 copies within months, urging people to stand against tyranny. O ye that love mankind, ye that oppose not only the tyranny, but the tyrant, stand forth. Every spot on the world is overrun with oppression. Freedom has been hunted round the globe. O receive the fugitive, and prepare in time an asylum for mankind. Abigail Adams recognized the changing climate as an opportunity for women's rights, and urged her husband John Adams to remember the ladies in the new laws being drafted. She warned against granting unlimited power to husbands, asserting that all men would be tyrants if they could be, and threatened rebellion if women were not given a voice in the new legal framework. Congress eventually formed a committee to draft a formal Declaration of Independence, assigning the task to Thomas Jefferson, a 33-year-old Virginian. Jefferson had previously written the preamble to Virginia's Constitution and utilized it as a guide for crafting the Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia. He aimed for it to reflect the American spirit and ideals of liberty. Although Jefferson believed Benjamin Franklin should have authored the Declaration, Franklin preferred to avoid drafting documents for public bodies. Instead, he made subtle revisions to Jefferson's text, changing "We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable" to "We hold these truths to be self-evident." However, significant changes came from Congress itself. Jefferson's original draft included a passionate condemnation of the slave trade, reflecting his complex relationship with slavery as both a slaveholder and an opponent of the institution. Ultimately, this condemnation was removed before approval on July 4, 1776. Samuel Johnson poignantly questioned this hypocrisy. How is it that we hear the loudest yelps for liberty among the drivers of Negroes? This period marked a crucial turning point in American history, as revolutionary fervor grew alongside internal contradictions regarding freedom and equality. The actions and writings of figures like Paine and Adams shaped not only public sentiment, but also laid foundational ideas that would resonate throughout American history. For Benjamin Franklin, July 4, 1776, was marked by profound personal loss. On that day, troops arrested his son, William Franklin, at the governor's mansion and took him to jail in Litchfield, Connecticut, where he would remain for about 2 years. Franklin chose not to intervene or speak out. He allowed the situation to unfold without his influence. Although he believed the Declaration of Independence would be adopted 2 days earlier, John Adams accurately predicted its future significance. The 2nd day of July, 1776, will be the most memorable epoch in the history of America. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations from one end of the continent to the other from this time forward, forevermore. Even if Congress seemed to overlook women's contributions, Abigail Adams was swept up in the excitement of this new beginning. As bells rang and cannons fired, she noted the joy on every face. After a reading of the Declaration at the State House in Boston, she remarked that royal authority had ended in their state. Thus ends royal authority in this state, and all the people shall say, Amen. On July 9th, George Washington had the Declaration read to his troops. They now had a formal League of States to defend. That same day in New York, the Sons of Liberty toppled a lead statue of King George III and melted it down to produce 42,000 Patriot bullets. John Adams acknowledged the challenges ahead. I am well aware of the toil and blood and treasure that it will cost us to maintain this declaration and support and defend these states. Yet through all the gloom, I can see rays of ravishing light and glory. After Washington's forces successfully chased the British from Boston to Halifax, Nova Scotia, Congress felt a sense of elation and mistakenly viewed the British as easily defeated adversaries. However, they were gravely mistaken. The British were mobilizing for a significant effort by raising troops and funds while preparing their largest army ever sent overseas. William Howe's 9,000 men from Halifax would join Admiral Richard Howe's 23,000 troops from England in New York Harbor. In 1776, New York was a bustling seaport with a population of 25,000. Its strategic harbor was ice-free for most of winter, making it a vital key to controlling the continent. Whoever held New York would have a considerable advantage in winning the war, a fact not lost on the British. Anticipating General Howe's movements, Washington marched the Boston Army to New York to reinforce the existing troops. By mid-1776, he was prepared to confront any British advance with 23,000 men, though nearly two-thirds of them were untrained state militia. The battles around New York turned into a series of disasters for the Americans, marked by continuous defeats and retreats. The militia proved unreliable. Many soldiers left in droves, feeling no obligation to stay, as there were no repercussions for abandoning their posts. In New York, Washington faced the consequences of the misconceptions surrounding the American Revolution. The belief that simple farmers could easily defeat British regulars had undermined his proposal to Congress for a large standing army of 40,000 men. Instead, Congress insisted on maintaining a smaller, temporary army, with soldiers serving only 1 year, an arrangement they deemed sufficient for virtuous Americans. Among those short-term recruits was 15-year-old Joseph Plum Martin from Milford, Connecticut. His initial 6-month enlistment unexpectedly extended into 6 years, during which he participated in many major battles. At 70 years old, Martin authored a narrative of some of the adventures, dangers, and sufferings of a revolutionary soldier, providing an accurate and complete autobiography of a Continental soldier. Martin experienced his first battle at Long Island when the British launched a decisive attack and routed the Americans at Brooklyn Heights. He recounted witnessing wounded soldiers. "We soon landed at Brooklyn upon the island. We now began to meet the wounded men, some with broken arms, some with broken legs, some with broken heads. This battle marked Martin's initial taste of defeat as British forces declared victory and anticipated taking New York. Washington's decision to divide his forces between Long Island and Manhattan proved unwise. With the British fleet controlling the harbor, nearly 10,000 American troops found themselves trapped on Long Island. The revolution hinged on their escape, which was facilitated by John Glover and his Marbleheaders. Under the cover of darkness, Washington managed to evacuate his entire army from Brooklyn back to Manhattan using boats operated by his skilled soldiers from Marblehead, Massachusetts. When the British awoke the next morning, they discovered that American lines had vanished. The loss of the first significant opportunity to eliminate Washington and his army occurred as the Americans, overpowered on land and sea, resorted to an innovative but ultimately ineffective weapon: David Bushnell's Turtle, recognized as the world's first submarine. This submarine could submerge for half an hour, and with Benjamin Franklin's suggestion, it was equipped to illuminate its dials with foxfire, allowing the pilot to navigate underwater. However, the attack on the British fleet was a complete failure, leading to no further attempts. For 2 weeks, General Howe refrained from advancing against the Americans on Manhattan Island, instead engaging in peace talks at his home on Staten Island with representatives from the Continental Congress, including Benjamin Franklin and John Adams. During these discussions, Franklin's preference for open windows clashed with Adams' desire to keep them closed, leading to a humorous debate that ended with Adams falling asleep, while Franklin extolled the virtues of fresh air. Their inability to reach a consensus mirrored their struggles in negotiating peace with the British. When talks broke down, Howe resumed his offensive against Washington's forces, landing troops at Kip's Bay on Manhattan. The Connecticut militia witnessed the British Armada approaching and fled in panic, running past Washington in disbelief. Frustrated, he threw his hat to the ground and lamented, "Are these the men I'm supposed to defend America with?" After being routed at Kip's Bay, Washington regrouped his army in Harlem Heights. When the British spotted the Americans, they sounded a call reminiscent of successful fox hunting. This humiliation may have spurred the Americans into their most successful engagement in New York, a draw. Washington expressed his despair. "Such is my situation that if I were to wish the bitterest curse to an enemy on this side of the grave, I should put him in my stead with my feelings." Howe continued to pursue Washington northward to White Plains, where another confrontation awaited at the end of October. However, significant damage occurred at Forts Washington and Lee along the Hudson River, strategically vital encampments designed to prevent British access up the river. While stationed in White Plains, Howe orchestrated a masterful assault on Fort Washington. The British bombarded it from all sides and swiftly overwhelmed American defenses within half an hour, resulting in the surrender of 3,000 American troops and over 100 cannons. 4 days later, General Charles Cornwallis launched an attack on Fort Lee with 4,000 men using flatboats along the Hudson Palisades. Although the Americans managed to escape this time, they lost the fort and its supplies to British forces. By the end of 1776, New York, its harbor, and the crucial Hudson River had fallen into British hands. Washington's army had dwindled to just a few thousand men, leaving American hopes at an all-time low. In December, Thomas Paine, the author of Common Sense, penned another compelling piece titled The American Crisis. He wrote, "These are the times that try men's souls. The summer patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of his country. But he that stands it now deserves the thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph." In contrast to the urgency of Washington's situation, General William Howe called for an end to his 1776 campaign on December 14th and prepared for a comfortable winter in captured New York City, just 100 miles from Philadelphia. Meanwhile, Washington retreated with his beleaguered army into the rugged countryside of New Jersey and Pennsylvania, focused on survival. The military landscape of the 18th century was markedly different from today. Warfare often paused during winter months in colder climates. Howe's decision to halt operations allowed Washington to regroup, albeit in a state of desperation. As Washington faced these challenges, he reflected on his precarious position. "No man, I believe, ever had a greater choice of difficulties and less means to extricate himself from them." The situation for Washington was dire as he prepared for what lay ahead.